that would have great import to the work done in Latter-day Saint temples in future years. At the funeral of Seymour Brunson, who was a faithful member of the Nauvoo High Council, he for the first time taught the principle of baptism for the dead, referring to Paul's teachings to the Corinthians, in which he was asking them, if you don't believe in the resurrection, why are you baptized for the dead? He described how it would be the saints' privilege to be baptized for their loved ones who had died without the privilege of receiving the gospel. He emphasized the importance of this and warned the saints that if they neglected this work in behalf of their dead, that their own salvation would be in peril. Well, with the encouragement of the prophet and with the view of this vision of this marvelous new principle, the saints eagerly went into the Mississippi River and began receiving baptism for their loved ones who had died.
Baptism for the dead in the 1840s and even going into 1841 was one of the main religious activities of the Latter-day Saints in Nauvoo. Through that process, one of the recorders of baptisms for the dead was a man named William Weeks. Of all of those invited to present architectural plans for the proposed Nauvoo temple, it is not any surprise that the man who was very familiar with the importance of ordnance work, that had recorded much of the baptisms for the dead, that his architectural renderings would be selected. Now, Weeks will work with the prophet. The prophet was very proactive in having the temple built. There were actually 4 stone quarries in Nauvoo that were used in the process. We know that at one point Weeks came to him and suggested how impossible it was to build round windows in the building. Joseph indicated to Weeks that he would have it built with those round windows, that he had seen the building in Revelation. As the construction went forward, it will be time to put in the cornerstones.
The principal cornerstone in representation of the first presidency is now duly laid in honor of the great God, and may it there remain until the whole fabric is completed. And may the same be accomplished speedily, that the saints may have a place to worship God, and the Son of Man have where to lay his head.
By fall of 1841, the basement of the temple was sufficiently done that the font area could be temporarily enclosed and the font dedicated. And immediately thereafter, work for the dead, baptisms for the dead, went forward. Interestingly, Joseph Smith himself participated. Members of the 12 supervised. In other words, the top leaders of the church were very much interested in and participated personally in the work of baptisms for the dead. Another significant temple ordinance was revealed about a year and a half later. This would now be the spring of 1842. On May the 4th of that year, on the upper floor of Joseph Smith's red brick store, the prophet gave for the first time what we know as the temple endowment. Now, there had been in Kirtland what later church leaders described as a partial or initiatory portion of the endowment, perhaps referring to the washings and anointings that were performed in Kirtland. But here in Nauvoo, on that occasion, the prophet unfolded the full instructions that help the saints understand what is required for us to return to our Father's presence.
I spent the day in the upper part of the store, in council with 7 brethren, instructing them in the principles and order of the priesthood, attending to washings, anointings, endowments, and the communication of keys pertaining to the Aaronic priesthood, and so on to the highest order of the Melchizedek priesthood, setting forth the order pertaining to the Ancient of Days, and all those plans and principles by which anyone is enabled to secure the fullness of those blessings which have been prepared for the Church of the Firstborn.
The following year, yet another temple ordinance was unfolded. He recorded a revelation that we know as Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, in which he was told about the principle of celestial marriage, the fact that marriages performed by proper priesthood authority, not just for this life but for eternity, and which are sealed by the Holy Spirit of promise, that is, for those who are worthy, are marriages that can endure forever. And what a wonderful promise that is as we think about our family relationships and how precious they are to us, and to realize that that isn't just for this earth, for this mortal life, but for eternity.
During the last several months of the prophet Joseph's life, he became increasingly concerned about making sure that the 12, a quorum of the 12 apostles, were properly trained, and that they had received the keys of power and the keys of knowledge that he said had been bestowed upon him by heavenly beings. There was a meeting that was held between the prophet Joseph and the members of the quorum of the 12. One of our principal witnesses about this meeting in March of 1844 is Wilford Woodruff, and he is an unimpeachable witness. And Wilford Woodruff talks about Joseph meeting with the 12 and telling the 12 how every key of power and knowledge, priesthood authority, had been bestowed upon him. And now he was turning to the 12 and bestowing upon them keys of power, keys of knowledge, keys of authority, the blessings that they needed to bear off the kingdom.
He stood upon his feet some 3 hours. The room was filled as with consuming fire. His face was as clear as amber, and he was clothed upon by the power of God.
I have had sealed upon my head every key, every power, every principle of life and salvation that God has ever given to any man who ever lived upon the face of the earth. Now I have sealed upon your heads every key, every power, and every principle which the Lord has sealed upon my head. I tell you, the burden of this kingdom now rests upon your shoulders. You have got to bear it off in all the world, and if you don't do it, you will be damned.
Nauvoo was a large city that required the hands of many skilled laborers to build. Though men did most of the hard labor, it was not unusual to see women voluntarily sewing clothes for the less fortunate or teaching school to children. While their daily work was important in building the city, the Lord had even greater promises in store for the women of Nauvoo.
As work on the temple began, Sarah Granger Kimball had a wonderful view of the temple from her home. As she watched work continue, she noticed the poor of Nauvoo working in the temple quarries. She desired very much to help these workers and to sew clothes for them, whereas she had the money and could supply the fabric, the thread, and other supplies. She didn't know how to sew. So she asked a friend of hers, a Miss Cook, to be the seamstress. Eventually, Sister Kimball and Sister Cook established a small society to help the temple workers. Into this society, they also invited Eliza R. Snow, who was asked at the first meeting to write up a constitution for the group. When Eliza R. Snow showed that constitution to Joseph Smith for review, he said it was the best he'd ever seen, but he then said that the Lord had something much better for the sisters of the church, that he wanted them to be organized under the priesthood.
On the 17th of March, 1842, in the upper room of the red brick store, Joseph Smith and several other brethren, along with 20 sisters, joined together to create what we now call the Relief Society. In the meeting, Emma Smith was elected as president of the Relief Society. Joseph Smith said that that was in fulfillment of the revelation found in Doctrine and Covenants 25, where it calls her an elect lady. Joseph Smith attended many of the Relief Society meetings. He often taught the truths of the gospel, and he taught the sisters their responsibilities and blessings that they have as daughters of God.
It is natural for females to have feelings of charity,